we're just gonna get started on the first thing on our agenda. So, we're gonna have, if you're down with the CLC with SRG, Shayna Rock Gormley, come on up. Everybody give her a hand clap.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm going to pull this up. Great, all right, so Claudia and Eddie asked me to talk a little bit about in-rem today. So I wanted to just first get a sense from everyone about, raise your hand if you're familiar with in-rem foreclosure in the city or the state. Okay, great. So I might not need to go too much into the kind of introductory stuff that I was going to talk about, but I'll start just introducing myself. My name is Shayna. I'm an attorney at Community Law Center, and we are lawyers for nonprofits and neighborhoods. We do a lot of work around kind of split between nonprofit issues, so working with organizations to do board capacity building, tax-exempt work, representing on a variety of legal issues, and then we also do neighborhood work, which is really what brought us to in-rem and our work around vacant properties and tax sale. So judicial in-rem, as many of you already know, it's a new tool that was passed by the state legislature in 2019, implemented and started being used in Baltimore City in 2022, and it allows Baltimore to foreclose on, to actually bring a foreclosure rather than like take something through a tax sale process for a vacant property, whether a building with a VBN or a vacant lot, if the liens exceed the assessed value of a property. So it has to go through a legal process in circuit court to give, you know, all the due process requirements, notice to all the interested parties, give them the opportunity to respond, hold a hearing, and then at the end of that process, the city records the in-rem foreclosure judgment and becomes the new owner. So that's the process. There's, you know, a certain amount of steps that you have to do to actually change the ownership, but we have really seen this as a great tool for the city, and we're really happy to see it being used and to see the numbers kind of ramp up. It's definitely a faster and more efficient process than what we've seen before for properties that have had to go through tax sale foreclosure before in-rem. And we've also seen a lot of title issues come out of the tax sale process that hopefully we're not going to see with in-rem. Seems to be a better process for the title issues. So properties don't need to go through a tax sale auction with in-rem. Instead, you know, instead of a third-party lien purchaser bidding on that debt, getting a tax sale certificate, and then filing a foreclosure after a certain period of time, with in-rem, the city can, you know, not do that whole tax sale process, just file the foreclosure and take it through that way. So it skips the auction and also has the benefit of now the city is the new owner and they have some control over what the outcome of the process is going to be, who it's going to, you know, who they're going to sell to or transfer to. It has been a more efficient process. There's a separate docket for these in-rem cases. There's one magistrate that's been, I think, working on it since the beginning. I've started to see a second magistrate sometimes as well, and I think there's some increased circuit court capacity as well as internal city capacity for more attorneys, more paralegals to do the work of filing these cases. And from what I'm seeing, the average is around 7 to 8 months from the filing of the in-rem foreclosure all the way to when the judgment is recorded in Maryland land records. So a lot faster than what we were seeing with some of the tax sale foreclosure cases, which could sometimes take years. So I've been trying to listen in on the hearings, which are public. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to share. It's just call-in information. You can hear the hearings on, it's usually 2 or 3 or 4 Wednesdays a month that they hold these hearings through circuit court. It's all virtual, so the interested parties get a Zoom link because they do have to appear on camera if they're going to testify, but anyone can call in. So from my tracking and my records, since 2022, the city has filed more than 900 in-rem filings. And they're picking up the pace. They've got, I think, 13 attorneys working on this now, so we're definitely seeing more filings a month. I would say maybe getting up to 60 to 70 filings a month, where earlier this year even they were at maybe 20 to 30 filings a month. This has actually ticked up, so it's been about 560 of those 900 total have made it all the way through the process and gotten to a foreclosure judgment that's been recorded in Maryland land records. So the city is now the owner of record, and they can do what they like with it. They're the owner that is responsible for maintaining it, and they can transfer it to somebody who wants to do something with it. It's average of about 6 months from filing to the judgment, and then 7.5 months from filing to when the judgment gets recorded in Maryland land records and closes the loop and the city becomes the new owner. Some of them are taking a little longer. I think, sometimes there's an issue. Often it seems like we're seeing issues with posting not happening within 5 days of the complaint being filed, and that's mostly excused as long as enough time has lapsed to give notice for any interested party. But sometimes there are things, with like the publication or notice that slow things down, and they have to postpone hearings or give a little more time. And I've started to look at some of the older, some of the earliest filings that have gone to judgment, and we are starting to see that there have been some transfers to new owners. A lot of developers, especially nonprofit developers, at least one seemed like a side yard for a homeowner that was right next door. So yeah, I have my spreadsheet that I'm happy to share if anybody would like to look at that and see that data. Lots of information, and I'm trying to interest some folks that do like GIS mapping and reporting around this to see if there might be some stories and other things to develop with this data. So I've been encouraging communities to reach out, and if there are vacant properties in their neighborhood that they want to see taken through this in-rem process. The city has this eligibility form. I would love to hear from Baltimore City housing folks, is this still something that they're using? They had this eligibility form a couple of years ago as in-rem was getting off the ground, as a tool for communities and residents to say, we want you to deal with this property, assess it for eligibility for in-rem, because right now it's only those properties that are vacant and that the liens exceed the assessed value of the property that are eligible. So I don't know if the city is still kind of using this tool where communities can say, here's our priorities, but it is still, this form is still available. And so I hope that this is still something that the city is using to guide where there's most interest from communities in seeing in-rem. For those properties that either they're a vacant structure that doesn't have a VBN or the liens don't exceed the assessed value, that's where I'm encouraging communities to do the 311 reporting and say, this property is missing windows, it's uninhabited, it's open to the elements, get the VBN on it, and then get the city inspectors coming out and issuing citations for whatever issues there are, high grass and weeds, illegal dumping, failure to abate the vacant building notice if there doesn't appear to be any permits or any work on the property. You can get those VBNs, or those failure to abate the VBNs issued, those add a $1,000 fine. So that's a way to kind of leverage city code enforcement to stack up, increase the liens so that these properties become eligible for in-rem and can get turned back into productive use through this tool. Useful search tools that I've been using, CodeMap, the city's website where you can search for the property address and find all kinds of information about violation notices, VBNs, citations, are there permits, what's in SStat right now, so it's a really useful tool. Buy into Be More, I've been looking here to see, as properties get their foreclosure judgment recorded in Maryland land records, the city's now the new owner, I'm not always seeing them listed on Buy into Be More, so that's another kind of lingering question that we've had about what happens with these properties after the in-rem foreclosure judgment, but some of them do seem to get listed onto Buy into Be More. And And then Baltimore housing search tools, the 311 records in Open Baltimore, and then you can follow the in-rem cases, the filings themselves, with Maryland Judiciary Case Search. So some of my questions, as the city is acquiring these properties, it's now increasing the number of properties that it owns. And I know we put in a lot of work over the years to see a land bank happen, and that was not successful on the last try, but I think that's really a tool that other jurisdictions have found really useful and that we would like to see here, especially because it's a way for communities to have more input and more say in the process for outcomes. So I think this could be an opportunity to consider the land bank issue again. And then in terms of the disposition of properties after they've gone through in-rem, the city's the new owner, how do they decide what they're going to do with these properties? Are community goals and priorities considered in this? What happens with these properties? And then related to that, how on the other side, how is the city prioritizing? There's thousands of properties that are eligible, that are vacant, that have high liens. So, are they working from that list of community submitted properties? Are they, do they have lists from developers that they're trying to acquire to do site assembly? So I think those are some of the questions that I would like to see answered, and any insight that folks have would be really welcome. So last week, there was a hearing on City Council Bill 250080 for INREM 2 that would expand the eligibility for this tool. So right now, it's just the properties where the liens exceed the assessed value that are eligible, vacant properties. This would expand it so that still vacant properties, but where the liens aren't yet higher than the assessed value. So just trying to interrupt the cycle of deterioration that properties right now have to go through before they're eligible, trying to catch them earlier so that they're still in a better shape, easier to rehab. And this bill would just give the city the ability to bring these, to bring in-rems for more properties. Still questions around, what does compensation look like? Because there is going to be now a question because there's still equity in the property. The liens are not eclipsing all the value of the property. So we testified in favor, CDN testified in favor. The city housing department was opposed. I think, I don't know if they see this as like an unnecessary tool or still questions to be resolved, but we do think that this would be an important expansion. At some point, hopefully the city is going to get through all of the lower hanging fruit of the vacants where the liens are higher than the assessed value, and they're going to want to have this tool on the books to say, okay, this property has been vacant, it's been abandoned, we need to do something with it. So we'll see. I haven't heard anything more about a vote on this bill. There's going to be legislation on the vacancy tax coming soon that was authorized by the state legislature. That's something that is going to impact INREM and all of the other issues around vacant properties. And then the tax sale work continues. I know Claudia is going to keep everyone informed about that. We're going to be continuing to advocate for reform as we've done for a number of years. We think the tax sale system as it is right now is not serving anybody but the tax sale purchasers. And so if we really want to see real change on vacant properties and for neighborhoods, as well as for homeowners and families, heirs properties, we really need tax sale reform. And I think land bank is really related to that as well. So happy to answer any questions. And as I said, I've got lots of information, data that I'm happy to share. So if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
Shannon, who introduced the NREM 2 legislation?
Councilwoman Ramos. Yeah. And I think it was co-sponsored by a number of the other city council members. So I think unless something changes, a lot of their questions seemed really supportive, and it seemed like they wanted to move it forward. So
I think it was most of the people on the housing committee were co-sponsors.
Based on the hearing that just happened and some of the agency concerns, do you know if any amendments being drafted or any insight to that?
I don't have any insight about what the right now, but I know there were a lot of questions around the compensation issue, like the public purpose. So I'm hoping that they're going to address those. There were sections already in the bill about how compensation would work. So I'm seeing those. I think that those are resolvable questions, and I hope that they will get there so that they can pass it and figure out what really needs to happen.
The other thing that we sort of had a sidecar conversation about is also the city's use of eminent domain. So I first want to say that the city of Baltimore was against in round one. So I figure we always start at this, we start at round one. When we put out things, the answer is going to be no. So I kind of also am hopeful that we can come to a bill that is agreeable to everyone, but I also know the city's position. I was teasing these guys that when you drive into the city of Baltimore, there ought to be a sign that says, we're already doing that. Because that's pretty much the answer to everything that's suggested. It's like, oh, we're already doing that. It's like when we suggested the land bank, they were like, oh, the city has all the tools that are in the land bank. I'm like, yeah, but they're not doing it, So I think that from an advocacy standpoint, I feel like we can move the needle to get to a bill that addresses the properties that we're trying to address. And then I would also say that, we're going to follow the next draft of the bill. I haven't seen a new draft of it.
Yeah, and I think, regardless of whether it ends up being used, just to pass it, to have it on the books for when it's needed, just makes sense to me. So I think, yes, getting it right obviously is what you want to do before it passes, but I do see this as it's going to be a useful tool. And just like in round one, maybe they said we're already doing that, but we've seen this be a faster, more efficient tool. And so I think all the tools in the toolbox, as always, are needed for addressing the scope of the vacancy problem.
And, the other thing one of the reasons I asked Shana to present today is because if there are properties that you put on in rent and you think that your property is legitimate, she is the person to call. She has the data and is really following it closely. So the properties that you're following must be yours work. She's the person.
Yes, and there's a couple of folks that have asked me about properties. They've said, here's the ones we're interested in, and I've just kind of had them on my spreadsheet, and when I see them get filed, I send out a notification to whoever's interested. So that's been useful too, because I'm curious on, the disposition end for developers, what does that look like? And so I would love to give you that information so that I can hear from you about what that looks like, what you're hearing from the city.
So you mentioned earlier about how there's been about 900 plus properties that have had in-run properties. Thank you. But maybe about 160 that have gone through the process of transferring ownership to the city of Baltimore. And I was curious if there was maybe a main reason why these properties, like the gap properties, haven't had that transfer of ownership. Was there maybe, I actually wouldn't know what it could be, but I'm curious if you've seen anything that explains why more of those properties haven't been transferred over to ownership to the city.
Yeah, I think it's really just a question of they're working their way through the process. So there's maybe, I don't know, like a dozen maybe properties that have started the process and the case has been dismissed. Either there was some issue with the filing, or in like a couple of cases, one of the owners has come forward and said, we're going to redeem the property, and so the case didn't go forward. But for most of them, they are, I think, going to get there. It's just that they have to go through the process. So like a lot of them have just been, because they've picked up the pace, they've been filing more recently. And so those ones, if they were filing yesterday, hopefully we're going to see them become owned by the city sometime mid next year. So I think for a lot of them, it's just that they have to work their way through the system. And there's always, while they're using this tool, there's always going to be a gap between the number that they've filed and the number that they've taken all the way to judgment. But at some point, I think they'll have caught up with the number of properties that have really high liens. So that's, I think, where we want to see that in round 2 become available so that they can address all of the vacant properties.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
So as a follow-up, a couple couple properties we talked about that, you know, the owner came forward and said they would rehab the property. Was there any stipulations given by the courts in terms of like time?
So they don't even have to commit to rehabbing it for this process. All they have to do is say, or they have to pay the liens. So basically, this is a process like tax sale, where the city's like hook to bring them into court is you haven't paid your taxes, or your water bill, or your environmental citations. And so we're bringing you to court to get the taxes and the liens that were owed. So then, as soon as they do that, they have the right to, it's called the right of redemption, to pay those taxes and liens. If they do that, the case is, you know, there is no more case because the property owner has made the city whole in terms of its liens. Now, there's separate processes for dealing with, it's still a vacant property. It's still, you know, is subject to code enforcement for not abating the BBN, for high grass needs, for all of those things. But in terms of the in rem foreclosure, if the property owner pays the liens, then that's it. The city's going to dismiss the case.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I have two questions here that I'm going to add. So you were just saying that the kind of teeth or the board have been saying what the impact of these taxes and offset the liens. In that situation, for anyone to what necessarily would be the teeth or the accent that would know of the environment liens. And then also, for that, in my conversations about the one too, I have generally heard a little bit of a hesitancy and resistance to move forward in those for fear of the decisions getting over to federal appeal, potentially depriving people of revenue, profit, so on and so forth. So in future revisions of that bill, I don't know if you're aware of as to what facets of the proposals address that specific topic of making sure that people are not deprived prematurely of their properties. There, unfortunately, are a lot of situations where there's elderly people, bills to repair houses are not what bills to repair houses used to be back in the 19 whatever, when they purchased their houses. So, in terms of the mechanisms to safeguard against overuse of this, I do agree that it is a helpful tool, maybe even a necessary tool at such a point in time, but to prevent the use of that tool, what mechanisms are there?
Yeah, so the in-rem foreclosure process itself is what protects people's due process rights. So you have to go through this court process where it gives notice, so they have to be served with the filing, they have to find all the interested parties. If the person on the deed has passed away, they have to figure out, okay, so, you know, who is administering the estate, or if there's, you know, no estate, who are the heirs? They have to find all the interested parties, give them notice, they have to publish in the newspaper. So just like any foreclosure process, they have to go through that, give them time to respond, hold a hearing. And I would say once to twice every hearing, they hear maybe 20 to 30 properties, cases in a single hearing. Maybe one or two of those in a hearing, some interested party will show up for. So it's really a mix, I would say, between LLCs who are the owners and homeowners or estates of homeowners. And so sometimes we get the homeowner shows up or an heir or, you know, somebody else connected with them, or somebody related to the LLC owner or a mortgage holder. For the most part, they show up because they get a notice in the mail that their property is listed, their name is listed, but they say, I have no objection to the city taking the property. They just, you know, they don't want any liability themselves. Maybe it, you know, was a family home that has really just, you know, got into bad condition and the taxes got really high, or, you know, there was a water main break or something. So for a lot of the situations where somebody does come forward, they mostly say, I have no objection to the city taking it. For those situations more rarely where they do want to try to preserve it, the magistrate says, okay, talk to the city, figure out what you can do to redeem the property. And then they postpone the hearing, come back and say either we came to some agreement, we're we would love to see payment plans so that people aren't paying, if their mortgage is paid off, they're not paying their lump sum yearly taxes all at once. We want people to be able to pay their taxes, which we've found really effective in other places for people being able to pay. But they can work something out to redeem the property, pay the taxes, and then preserve it. So that the in-rem process really is meant to be the due process safeguard, because it has to go through the court. It has to go through this process with all of these constitutional requirements. And so in-rem 2, just like in-rem, would have the same hook for the reason that the city can bring these cases is that there are unpaid taxes and other liens. What's different is that whenever the government is taking some kind of properties, to avoid it being an unconstitutional taking, they have to compensate the owner for whatever the value is, the just compensation. For the in-rem 1 cases that they're doing right now, there's no equity in the property beyond the liens. The liens are so high that they dwarf the assessed value. So we've seen some cases, especially for vacant lots, that have just been cycling through tax sale year after year. And so I've seen vacant lots that are assessed at $5,000 that have liens of $1 million, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So those ones it's pretty easy. They can say, you owe us, this, maybe there's a demolition lien on the property that's just, kind of snowballed over time. Those ones it's easy. They can say, you owe us these liens, no one appears to object to the liens, so they go through the due process requirements, and they can foreclose without having to pay compensation, because the $5,000 is just a drop in the bucket compared to the liens. But as they start to get to the properties, and in-rem 2 passes, where the liens aren't higher than the assessed value, now they have to figure out what's the difference between the two, put that, in escrow for the owner or interested parties to come, be able to get. There's the case Tyler v. Hennepin County that was heard in the Supreme Court a couple of years ago that is, I think, really going to impact the city's tax sale process more generally. There is currently a lawsuit brought by Edmondson Community Association organization and a number of homeowners, and Legal Aid is representing them on that, arguing that the current tax sale system does violate these constitutional requirements and is not giving people just compensation for the taking. So that's working its way through the courts right now, but I think that is going to impact the city's tax sale process, and hopefully we hope that they're going to rethink the process, because the Edmondson Community Organization impact was they had a continuity issue, a leadership issue. Their property, their community organization property went into tax sale for, I believe it was $2,500. It went to tax sale. It was the liens were bought at auction by a purchaser. Went all the way through foreclosure. By the time the organization, had new leadership in place, the purchaser had foreclosed. When they auctioned off the property, they sold it for like $140,000. And the only thing that Edmondson Community Organization got back was $2,500 for the bid price that the purchaser had paid at tax sale. So they lost out on an enormous amount of equity in their property, and they're arguing that their current tax sale system does violate the Constitution. So these properties where the liens are really high have a little bit of a different situation, but that is going to be an issue when it gets to in-rem 2.
I know the application is completely in what you think. And they can go through the process for literally years in the state of Maryland, almost put footers in the ground, spend all of that money to do it, and then at the last minute, county council can unilaterally say, we're going to decide to change the zoning in this area and stop the project, right? Now that significantly hurts our nonprofit developers. The large for-profit developers can hang cash over the side for years, and it's okay. Our nonprofit developers are working on very small margins from development to development to development. So it has the perverse effect of incentivizing luxury housing over affordable housing, right? Now, in the state of Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, let me do that right. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, they are an early vesting state, so it's As soon as they put those plans in, as soon as those applications, significantly complete applications, I believe is the legal term, is put in, it's vested. And you can't change the rules of the game at that point in time. And then based on the comprehensive plan and zoning, everything stays locked. Any changes made doesn't affect the project on the ground. So we want to do the same thing in Maryland and say, we need to provide some level of predictability, that once you start a project, you know that throughout the process, you know the rules that you're working with, and the rules don't change, okay? There's only a few changes we've made to that one, which is basically, by the way, the same bill as it ended last year on Sunny Diet and died at 11:30 a.m. I don't know if anybody's keeping track of that. But the bill that died at 11:30 a.m. in the Senate on Sunny Diet is basically what we're bringing back with two additions to it. So one of which is the use of what's called third-party permitting. So where you have local governments that are just staff is overwhelmed in the permitting department. It's taking a really long time to get permits done. Then they would have the ability to use third-party permitters that, of course, are up to snuff and credentialed and are following the same rules as the county municipality. And that gives them a little bit of freedom to operate. And the second thing we're adding is also the deferral of impact fees until near the end. So a lot of times you walk into a county and you'll say, I want to build this multi-family property, and the county will say, great, we want to put on there a $12,000 per unit education impact fee at the very beginning when you're trying to get capital to build this thing. So what if we put that in the end, right where you get the use and occupancy license? So you build the whole thing, and now you got to pay it to complete it, and that they still get their money. It's before anyone's actually impacted, right? But it's not at the beginning of the process. So that bill, the early vesting plus, as I'm calling it, is the one that's supposed to help incentivize multifamily development in the state of Maryland. And it would be applicable to all types of multifamily development. And it actually would be applicable to single-family development too. Not just affordable, but also market rate, right? But either way, it adds predictability. It allows for us to, when we're putting money out, because we're putting a substantial amount of state money out, subsidies to build a lot of those affordable housing developments, that we're walking with predictability. It's cutting the timeline down and making it quicker to get these projects done. Time equals money. We can get more units out the door. It lowers the price of housing overall. The second bill that we're running, actually before I get into that, when you finish the investment, that's been approved as a private sponsor bill, right? So the governor's office will come to us and say, we love this idea, we want you to give it to a private sponsor and work with them, or we love this idea and we want you to run it as a department, or we love this idea and we're going to take it, it's not going to be a gubernatorial bill, or we hate this idea, don't run it, right? So they turned to us and said, we want you to run this as a private sponsor bill. And we have two great legislators that are already signed on the sponsor, one of which is Senator Malcolm Augustine on Triple E. He's going to be our sponsor in the Senate for vesting. And Delegate Dylan Baylor, the newly appointed delegate in Anne Arundel County, who sits on the Environment and Transportation Committee, and most importantly, sits on the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee where this will be heard. So we got two great legislators in that. Now, the second bill is our starter homes, and we're calling it starter homes and silver homes, and we've actually worked with the Department of Aging on that name. So fundamentally in the state of Maryland, when we think of affordability, we think who it impacts the most. It's when it comes to working folks, it comes to those who are entering the career arc, right? So my 23-year-old son, for instance, or it goes to those who are empty nesting, needing smaller homes, moving to a fixed income. Kids that moved out of the house, they don't need that much house, right? So that's why we're calling starter and silver homes. So on either end of that particular career arc is where affordability is really biting people, right? So let me give you a little stat that I always find shocking. I hope you do too, especially considering the amount of money that we're putting out for the blueprint and educating our kids giving them a world-class education to turn around and find out that in 2021, 2/3 of out-migration in the state of Maryland were people between the ages of 17 and 35. So if you think about it, what we're doing is we are spending a lot of money to give people a world-class education, and because they cannot find a place to live in the state of Maryland, they are taking that money that we've invested in them, and instead of working in businesses and working careers in the state of Maryland, are moving, like my son did, to a nearby state. He lives in Pittsburgh now. Right? So what are we doing to incentivize homeownership and keeping folks in the state of New York and keeping affordability where it needs to be to ensure that we're building the next generation of folks that are making Maryland, just creating Maryland, the next generation of Maryland that will create our state. And so with that in mind, we're looking at starter homes. So homes that are smaller, on smaller lots, smaller footprint homes, like we have all over the state right now. You can drive all through Baltimore County, you can definitely drive through Baltimore City, which is going to be, the best example of these smaller homes where you have row homes on small lots that are stacked up 3 stories high, right? You go around the rest of the state, you cannot build in Annapolis anywhere because in the 70s and 80s, we rezoned everything so that we've incentivized nothing but McMansions. You got quarter-inch acre lots, 2,000 square foot homes everywhere you go, 2-car garages, right? You got 40, 50 foot setbacks from the streets. That's how we're zoning single family, right? What if we put in the bill, and we worked on this to say, max or minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet. And anywhere that's served with water and sewer that way. Right? So we're not talking all statewide. Where you have public water and sewer, in Baltimore City, all the municipalities around the state, where I live in Baltimore County, which is technically in the county, but I get served by public water and sewer. What if we have the option to lot split, create these smaller homes, and create that natural affordability? And when we look at other states that have done similar measures, the actual natural price of a home is up to $100,000 less expensive than what is currently zoned in those large single-family zones, between about $80,000 to $100,000. So just through zoning, we can actually create more of a natural affordability rate for home ownership, right? And where this bill really came from is an outcry from a lot of legislators that said, you guys are always working on renters. You always have people who rent for a living. When are you going to do something for home ownership? Okay, well, let's create the environment where we can create these smaller homes on smaller lots, allow for lot splitting, decrease the setbacks. So this bill actually says if you're building in single family zones that are served by public water and sewer, maximum setback can be no greater than 10 feet in front backyard and 5 feet in the side yards. Right? So this humongous setback. And what if we incentivize as much of that space and build densely in our growth areas where water and sewer is instead of having large single-family quarter-acre lots? So that's the second big bill. It's also got some restrictions on land. It has to, has specific architectural design. We're taking that out, saying no. And more than anything else, that's affecting, must have 2 cars, must have a garage, or must have this much square footage, right? So we want to remove that from the requirements too. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we are obviously not in our critical areas. We are not in preserved land. We want to protect all of those green spaces. Historical districts are specifically exempted, so that we're not touching that historical district, paving over something that has a specific feel with the borders preserved. So those are the 2 big bills. That one will be an important one. We're going to run that as an EHCD bill. It's going to show up as us doing it. And then the other one is going to be a private responsive bill. So that's how we're planning on trying this section come at housing. And you'll notice neither one of those bills have a price tag on it. That is by design, right? It is just a policy decision. You will also notice both of those bills go to the very heart of what our local government cares about most. That is local control, right? And for those of you who have watched us in the last 2 sessions, I know Claudia has, we have sometimes been at loggerheads with the Maryland Association of Counties and the Maryland Municipal League, but we have engaged them early on and said, listen, we really want you guys to be partners with us on this. Like, we have a housing crisis, we need you guys to come and help us solve it. If anybody paid attention to the governor's executive order earlier this year, it was specifically designed to call us ourselves out, right? You read most of that executive order saying the state's not doing this, our agencies aren't doing this, here's the way we're going to fix ourselves internally. And the governor made it very clear when he did the announcement that, you can't go and say to someone, hey, I need you to fix your house if you can't fix your own first. So our point is, we are going to streamline what we're doing. We are going to work with other agencies in what needs to be done to reduce timelines and reduce red tape And then we are asking our local partners, hey, we have a housing crisis, it's affecting our economic development, we need you to join with us, we need you to help us fix this problem, right? So, with all of that and me talking, with no presentation, but it is. So, gentlemen, does anybody have any questions about this too? Yes.
Sorry, you said it earlier, just moving quickly, which is great, but did you say the department is sponsoring the starter homes, silver homes?
Yeah, that would be us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're running that.
Could you talk about what defines like a smaller home? Like what does that necessarily look like? And could you also talk about any market studies that indicate that that is the type of home level that is in demand
Market studies on the type of home that is in demand. I can give you examples of what sells and how quickly it sells in the state of Maryland that currently fits that has been built under those rules when they used to exist in the 50s and 60s that can't be built now, and show you a square footage difference in price each year. As for what people want to purchase, I think we're at a point where we want to provide as many options as possible. So, do you want to buy the quarter acre lot for the 2,000 square foot home, 3,000 square foot home? Can you afford it? Do you want the smaller home on a smaller lot? And we're defining the small lot by 5,000 square feet, right? And then we are actually, we're not going to get dither down into it. Claudia can send out the information we sent out before about it, but you're going to have a maximum lot coverage on there too. So a lot of times you'll say, okay, if we have a small lot, we have to have this much covered with home, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove as many barriers to create more dense housing. I don't think I have any market studies on what people prefer, so I wouldn't be able to provide that for you, unfortunately. We want to just make sure that we have multiple options and then naturally affordable options. And if we can use zoning and land use to create naturally affordable options that right now don't exist, then we want to have to take the opportunity to do that. And obviously, less yard, less house is less expensive. And so we need to have those options out on the market right there. Because the stock we have that does fit that bill, 60s, 50s, 40s, who knows the bill, right? So why don't we have new neighborhoods that look the same way? It's just kind of what we're doing.
Thank you, Chuck.
So it's merely a question of like next steps. And so these bills are presented, but as like for this group, this space, how could we engage with the state to provide additional feedback if we wanted to?
And my good friend Claudia who we stay in regular contact with CBN, obviously, and work very closely with. And anybody here who wants a card, I know that was kind of flip to give her that, but I brought a stack. We want as many possible advocates and helpers that we can. It's going to take I don't know if you guys saw the budget reactions came out yesterday, right? So getting bills through are going to be, we're in an election year with a $1.5 billion deficit. We're trying to do land use bills. It's going to be a fun 3 months, right? So the more help we can get, the better. And I would obviously direct you guys to Claudia as well. Yeah, go ahead.
So, we have a new planning director. And I actually had an opportunity to meet with him this morning. He's really about getting rid of bureaucracy. So I'm just wondering if by any chance you had an opportunity to meet with him yet.
I have.
Okay.
Secretary Danny has.
Okay.
That's the important person to be with me. Yeah, I think that they are very closely aligned on that kind of as they moving things forward type of thing. But I would have to meet with them, but I haven't had a chance yet.
And Nicole, that's a good point. Eddie we've also been working to have a meeting with the planning director for CBN. So I don't think we hope to, so I hope to do that in the next, 4 to 10 weeks, depending on his availability.
Also, also, just to let everybody know, the reason why I'm giving her more marks is because that one young man back there is actually recording this entire thing, and he has a mic up there. And in order for us to, so he's gonna post this entire thing, so if anyone wants to come back and look at it again, you can, but we want to hear what you're saying. So that's why I'm coming around with the mic. So if you got anything you need to say, by all means, I'm going to have this mic in your face.
And let me close with this. I mentioned twice that my son lives in Pittsburgh. He's an aircraft mechanic. He works for an airline called Republic Airlines that flies out of Pittsburgh International Airport. It's apparently international because they go to Canada, whatever. Either way, my wife, his mother, and I received him, BWI is hiring. Nationals on it. Why don't you home? And he says, Dad, can you triple my pay because my rent will be tripled. So I am asking all of you to help me bring my son home and get these bills passed, and maybe build some starter homes, and maybe he can afford it. And that is my simple request to all of you. It's personal for me. He lives 5 hours away.
Chuck, we have some community land trust homes that are beautiful in Westport, and we'd love to have them.
I'm in touch with you.
I'll send you the information.
There you go. All right. And that's it for me. Kate, my trusted colleague, Kate Howard.
We thought we were going to get you today, Kate.
Yeah, well, I have like no updates, surprise. As everyone knows, because everyone's emailed me this week, we still do not have our finalized SRP recommendations for this year, but they are coming. So I obviously got a short stick today, right, to tell everyone no news. But yeah, so we have that, and once again, no update on the Bernie review either. That is also still coming. So yeah, so that's sort of where we are. We're hoping that the next, as I left the office today, the next few weeks, that the SRP announcements will come out. Yeah, and as Chuck alluded to, the budget for next year is not looking the greatest, so that's cool. Yeah, give us some grace as we're trying to work through some additional items because of that. Yeah, so that's pretty much what my update is. And then for the whole neighborhood revitalization division, if you have any of our MIP funding, OEG, CITC, SRP, any of those acronyms, please make sure that you are in compliance. That is something that we're really hitting hard. Everyone saw the articles about the charitable registrations for organizations and nonprofits throughout the state of Maryland. So we've always really worked hard with you all to make sure that those things are up to date and ready. So just make sure quarterly reports, when we email you and say, hey, please get us your quarterly report, we're not just doing it because we're annoying, we're doing it because we want to make sure that everybody's in compliance and we're all there together. So yeah, so those are my updates. Thanks.
Thank you. Also, thank you, Kate, for your continued collaboration with CDN. I just want to make sure, are there any questions for Kate and basically the neighborhood revitalization sort of more globally after have decisions been made yet? Any other questions? Okay. I just want to also thank you, Chuck, for your continued collaboration on the legislative matters, and I look forward to more collaboration in the coming weeks. I did also want to mention that there's a few things a few reports that have come out. You mentioned the governor's executive order, and I said that when it came out, but I do want people to be aware of that. Because it is, I mean, if nothing else, it says the governor continues to believe housing is a priority. And so people should be familiar with that executive order. Right now, I'm going to just take a little bit of time to mention some other publications that have come out. And I have had them, I posted them on CDN's newsletter, but I just want to mention a few things because it does tie into some of the things that Chuck just talked about. One, I think people should be familiar with the Housing Accelerated Playbook, because that is a publication that came out from the American Planning Association and the National League of Cities. I think it was actually actually 2023 that originally came out. But it's important because basically what that publication is saying is like, hey, what can we all do to produce more housing? And I would just say that we are in a housing crisis, and if you believe we're in a housing crisis, like there's a role for everyone. It may not be the same things. There's permitting, there's zoning, there's all sorts of things that incentives and things that cities and municipalities can do. And so I do think that it's important to emphasize this because this is also where the housing package that was just passed by the city council also is going. It was like, hey, how do we produce more housing in the city of Baltimore? What are the things that we need to do? What kinds of housing? I think your question about like, what kinds of housing are needed, I think there's been kind of a long conversation that Live Baltimore and other folks have been identifying, okay, what are some of the needs? What are some of the housing types that we need? And I think to have a more dynamic Baltimore market is also really important. The other thing I just also want to mention is in 2025, the state updated the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment, and that housing needs assessment, people keep asking me like, okay, so what do you do? So one of the things that CBN does is advocate. And we originally advocated for the first housing needs assessment to be done in 2020. And so this update is of concern to us to see those numbers. And if you, I would argue that we don't really need any more data about the problem. But for those of you who need more data about the problem, we now have data about the problem in 2025. So it's all there. And you can Google all this. You can just type Maryland Housing Needs Assessment right into your browser. Come right 2025. So there's the governor's announcement. There's a Maryland Housing Needs Assessment, and then last month the comptroller put out the State of the Economy series, the Housing and the Economy. That's more data about our housing assessment. So I think we're good. I think we've got enough data now about the housing problem in Maryland, where it is, who it affects. Anyone need data? Anybody? In any sector? I think I got it. We also are a partner with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and the Community Opportunity Alliance, formerly the CIA, and the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. So we have lots of data. And so if you need data or specific data, or you're looking for specific data points for a grant or an application, I'm happy to provide that and show you where things are, the neighborhood level data and all that. I think we've got enough. Also here with BENIA and other partners. But I think sometimes people are also saying, well, I need specific, specific area, specific neighborhood, specific zip code, census letter, like we have now. We really do. The other piece of information I just wanted to also call out, the comptroller's office, I think, started this trend, but everybody this summer was reading the book Abundance by Ezra Klein. And so I think that's an important context. And for those of you who, my husband teases me all the time, he's like, you can't read a book about work on vacation, that's crazy. And so if you don't want to read a book, you can also listen to the YouTube discussion about abundance on YouTube and capture that. So I just think it would be, those are just sort of a high top line, but I think one of the important things about the abundance discussion is that when we're talking about affordable housing, we can't just be talking about rental. We've got to be talking about opportunities for ownership, we've got to be talking about wealth building, and just the full spectrum of work around that. And what it means to grow an economy and empower and move people and economic mobility more, and how, I would say also how democratic policies have not necessarily helped people move up the ladder as it's been talked about, but it's really not being done. So just to be really clear about that, and where democratic policies have failed or missed, I think. So I also wanted to just take a little time and talk about our CDN priorities for the upcoming session. CDN has one priority every session. There's only one priority, and it's the budget. Every year. What do we do? We're there to make sure that there are resources for our members to do the work that they do. So we spend a lot of time with the Department of Housing and Community Development. We spend a lot of time with JDA and his staff. What's going to be available? Where is it available? For whom is it available? How does it work? And how do we make sure those resources are there? And we also are going to always be standing up for community-based development and community-based development service. So what's our priority? Next year, when you ask the question, I'll say the same thing. Last year, I do want to just point out a couple of things about last year. The programs that people in this room use most often are the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, Bernie, Community Legacy, Strategic Demolition. There's other programs, but I would say those are the top three. Maybe the Maryland Housing Fund is also a top one in Baltimore City as well. So I have lots of numbers and lots of trends. One of the key things that we've been arguing for is that we would like to see each year that 10% of the capital dollars, so if there's a capital appropriation of 10 million, that 1 million would be available for operating. So that it's not, because the truth is that what we hear consistently from our members is that there's not enough operating dollars, period, full stop. Last year, we were not successful in making that argument. So we saw 18 million for Bernie, 18 million for capital, and less than 500,000 for operating. And so that's just really hard for all of our members, and it's really hard to move $18 million worth of capital with that little bit of operating dollars. It just doesn't work. But in addition to that, I also want to point out that what has also been happening throughout the process in the last couple of years, to an extent that is concerning, is that the decisions about Bernie and core and community legacy are being made through the legislative process. So what's happening is when the session gets down to the last, I'm going to say 10 days or so, horse trading is made. What elected officials are doing in the General Assembly is saying, okay, I'd like to see $1 million of Bernie go to this organization. And they write it into law. And so we call that earmarking or fencing off funds. So last year, for Bernie, we had an $18 million appropriation, but 46% of Bernie funds were fenced off and made through the legislative process. So that makes the pot that's already small even smaller. Now, I will tell all of you in this room that also what happens is that people come up to me now and say, wow, how do I get out of that? So that my legislator goes up and says, how do I get $1 million? That's all. Unfortunately, it guts the process. And as we're in a really tough year, now we're going into a really tough year, I'm concerned that 100% of the funds could be fenced off. Right? So we spent a lot of time tactically talking with Chuck, talking with the secretary about how do I stop this, writing letters to the governor, saying, please stop the earmarking. Or let's, keep it, agree that it would be only 20% or something like that. But that is a fight that I will continue to have.